What I pick up all the time is the frustration of voices not heard, the frustration of that group of older women who were denied pensions because of the change in the pension age, frustration of young black kids who can't get the jobs and careers they want, frustration of Muslim women who put up with Islamophobia all the time, frustration of young people graduated, can't afford to get anywhere to live, get low pay, end up with a student debt and massive housing costs, can't save any money. I'm in a very privileged position. I've been elected to Parliament again. So it's my job to facilitate those voices. And that's what our forums are going to do. And do you know what? It's fun and it's exciting. And it's going to be a very important movement for the future.
Earlier this month, the United Kingdom had a general election. And as we all know, that threw up some pretty spectacular results. Labour are now the government. They have a majority of 174. The Tories, well, they endured their worst result ever. And the SNP have been reduced to a rump in London. There have also been a number of independents elected, however, which I think is a really interesting story, if somewhat neglected by the broader media. In England, 5 of them were elected, particularly campaigning around issues of Gaza and foreign policy. One of them joins us today. His name is Jeremy Corbyn. He's formerly the leader of the Labour Party, but he's just been re-elected in Islington North as an independent. Jeremy Corbyn, welcome to Downstream.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me in.
Well, it's our pleasure. I mean, you only were re-elected last week.
Indeed, a week ago today.
Very, very impressive. How are you and how did you celebrate?
I'm fine, absolutely fine. I've had a very, very busy week. Just meetings, events, and so on, and working out what we're doing in the future next and catching up on a vast amount of constituency casework. Celebrations, well, I don't drink, so I'm really boring. And so we've had one event in the pub at the end of my road last night, but I was the one not drinking. So I was able to get away with quite a long speech, which I don't think anybody else can remember, but that's okay. So yeah, celebrations, and we're going to have some stuff over the weekend to thank people because it's a very large group, amorphous group of people that came and helped us. And obviously it's building that gelling together of what we do for the future. And so I was very pleased with the campaign we run and delighted with the result.
You said actually, I think maybe in the days following your win, you said it was a kind of unprecedented campaign. You said people will look back in the future at this campaign as something which accomplished something really, new and consequential.
Yeah. Well, end of May, we announced that I was going to stand as an independent. We then appealed for help and support and got an office, moved in, got ready, got computer systems and everything set up. That took a few days, and we started canvassing from then on. And with no data whatsoever, we had to start basically from complete scratch. All we had was an electoral register. And we built that up very rapidly, very intensive door-knocking canvassing session. But everyone was a conversation. It's not like knocking on the door on behalf of a party. You can't knock on the door and say, "Hi, I'm the Labour candidate, please vote for me." No, every person who knocked on the door had to explain that I was an independent, why I was an independent, what the principles behind the campaign were, and then have that discussion and that conversation. And we managed to actually speak directly to more than 50% of the electorate, which is quite an achievement in 4 weeks when you think of the number of people that don't answer the door, never at home, whatever. And we then turned that into an electoral machine on polling day. We had a vast amount of help, and we got our vote out. We got our vote out to a much higher degree than has ever been done before. And the other difference in the campaign was that there was not really much hierarchy in the campaign. There was people whose various duties in the office, obviously, in terms of office management, canvass preparation, data analysis and strategic direction and so on. Most of my time was just spent walking the streets talking to people, which I did. And we had open air rallies all over the constituency. And we only had one indoor event through the whole of the campaign. All the rest of it was outdoors. And anybody could come, and anybody did come. So when we had a rally on the middle of the 6 Acres Estate, for example, which is near Finsbury Park Station, the rally was meant to be to start a canvassing session, and it did. So the rally lasted a half hour, 40 minutes or so. And what was interesting was, yes, those who were coming to do the campaigning came to the rally, but also people came out of their flats in the estate and just joined in. And I've never known a campaign where so many local people just walked up and said, how can I help? And it was a phenomenal experience. And we went to all the churches, mosques and so on, and made speeches at all of those as well. Great reception.
I mean, something strange happened, didn't it? Because...
Well, I got elected.
I say that because I came to see you campaigning, and I think it was about 10 days before the election. It was preceding the election. And my takeaway was, on the day of the campaign, I think you'll win. But goodness knows what Labour's done with postal votes, and they've got this big machine, and that's what's going to make it tight. You ended up winning by 7,500 votes. Like, it wasn't even close. You got 49.2% of the votes. You almost got 50% of all votes in the constituency. And like you say, to be able to do that from May, and my experience was, and this was repeated in the FT, many, many voters did think you were the Labour candidate. To go from A to B, that stunned me. And I think you have critics in the Labour Party and elsewhere in the media, etc. They've got to be eating humble pie, haven't they? I mean, that is absolutely extraordinary turnaround.
I'm not sure they know the recipe. We mobilised people on two bases, really. One was the political offer we were making, which was that if elected to Parliament, I will be demanding end to child benefit cap, environmental sustainability, public ownership of water, etc., and also international strategy based on peace. And so Gaza and that all came up quite a lot. And the second point of it was, which Labour probably forgot about, is that they think the constituency is a bit like the Labour Party leadership, i.e. living in fairly comfortable houses that are owner-occupied. Less than 30%, probably only 25% of the whole of the population of Islington North are owner-occupiers. The rest are large proportion private rented, and the rest in social housing, either housing association or council. They also forgot that I've been the MP for a very long time, and I like to think I've worked hard as the local MP in representing people on their in all their difficulties and problems. And so that paid off as well, because people said, oh yeah, remember what you did for my mum 20 years ago and things like this. And so it was this sense of being part of the community that made it much harder for Labour. Also, the Labour candidates' a close relationship with the private health sector, let's put it at that level, didn't help him at all.
Was that raised a lot when you were talking to people? Were people sort of mentioning that?
Yeah, towards the end of the campaign. Yeah, not at the beginning, because they didn't know anything about him. Towards the end of the campaign, it was raised a bit. Not so much with me, because most people that raised things with me were either personal issues they wanted to raise, so housing, schools, health, not individual health things and so on. But I think it was raised with a lot of others, yeah. But the campaign was one that was hopeful as well and fun. People joined in. And when we had the last rally on Highbury Fields, very big, for one constituency rally, probably 1,000 people there, which is a lot for a constituency event. And we had speeches, Mick Lynch and Owen Jones and others, and we had music, and we had Jermaine Jackman singing, and his voices got better and deeper. It was phenomenal. It sort of made your spine shiver. It was so good. So it was that kind of thing that we got in the campaign, and we created that sense of inclusion and atmosphere. And it is about, politics has to be about hope. And you don't get hope by reading statistics. You get hope by imagining what their lives could be like and what a society could be like. And why do we tolerate the levels of inequality, poverty, and injustice in our society? So it's about hope as well.
Speaking of hope, Keir Starmer won millions fewer voters in this general election than Labour did with you as leader in 2017. several million. He won 1 in 5 registered voters. I mean, this is what I find absolutely extraordinary. So he won at 33.5% of the vote, but you have a very low turnout, second lowest turnout, I think, after 2001 in the post-war era. And there's a fact out from IPPR today, only 52% of the adult population voted. 52%, which is the lowest in the democratic era.
52% of the adult population?
Yes.
Okay.
Which is, that's data which has come out from IPPR today. So obviously you've got many people who can't vote because they're foreign nationals, etc. But regardless, 52% of the adult population voted. So 1 in 5 registered voters, and even then, a small percentage of votes from all the parties combined. What does that say about Keir Starmer? Is he failing to offer hope?
Well, what does it say about the election and the result? Look at it this way. This percentage that Labour achieved, which I think is 33% of the votes, that is very low. The lowest achieved before was Wilson in 74, I think. There was, and also winning percentage. So this is a government that's been elected on the votes of a third of those who voted, when only half the population actually voted. So you're looking at a government running the country on 9 million votes and with an enormous parliamentary majority. So I was in Parliament this week, and these newly elected Labour MPs all whooping it up. They've won, they've got this. It's not a huge swing to Labour. It's not a huge result. And as you quite rightly said, in 2017, we got 3 million votes more. 2019, we got, I think, 700,000 more than there was achieved this time. So they need to be careful about that. Now, the significance of this result, there's a number of things. One is low turnout. 2, real lack of enthusiasm for the Labour offer. The loss of Labour support in safe Labour constituencies was the biggest. Labour did relatively well in some of the suburban marginals and gained them. Well done them. But they lost a lot of support in inner city areas. The third, and this is the really uncomfortable thing that all of us have got to face, is that the Tory vote declined massively because of the growth of Reform Party and led by Farage. And then you add up the Tory and Reform votes, you're looking at something very, very different. And this is the move to the far right in Europe and in Britain, and the direction of travel across Europe, with the exception now of France, has been that the centrist parties and the social democratic parties and even the socialist parties have all tacked to the right and joined in the general condemnation of migrants and immigrants and refugees in order to try and shore up their support. Look at the collapse of the left in Germany as a result of this. Now, what's this government going to do? Starmer government. Is it going to start conceding ground to Farage and the right on the basis that they're a new appeal? And we're then into some really horrible scenario where our society just dumps on refugees and migrants more and more and more. Now, I made it very clear throughout our election campaign, albeit in one constituency, I would never do that. I would never dump on a minority in any way, because you have to bring people together and unite them. The comments made by Keir Starmer and John Ashworth the week before the election about the Bengali community were abominable and appalling and hit their vote amongst the Bengali community. And you look at the vote that happened in Holborn and St Pancras, where there is a much bigger Bengali community than in my constituency. That community voted, sure, but they voted for Andrew Feinstein.
It was a weird one, because particularly with those two politicians, because like you say, the Bengali community in this country, but particularly in larger cities, is really big. I mean, and if you're not attuned to that, you might just think it's South Asian voters, Pakistani, Indian, etc. But most Indian restaurants you go into generally run by Bengalis.
Yeah.
And it was a moment for me, particularly with Starmer, where he was saying that people will be repatriated if they shouldn't be here. He didn't need to name a country. He overstepped. It wasn't necessary. It seemed almost like he was trying to give a bone to the right-wing press by being sort of performatively cruel, and it backfired.
It was a sort of throwaway remark of the kind you would hear on some right-wing media outfit, or you'd pick up in the Sun or the Mail, something like that. And it's just so insulting to the Bangladesh community in Britain.
So do you think, so we had net migration to this country over 2 years of about...
And to every other community for that matter, actually.
Of course.
Yeah.
Do you think net migration, which is 1.3 million over the last 2 years, do you think that's too high?
No, because I think the issue we have to face is we have a falling birth rate in Britain. The, how should I put these figures, replacement rate in London, where we are at the moment, is a rapidly declining population. It's around 1%, which is not even replacement. And the same thing is happening most of the rest of the country, and the same thing is happening all across Europe. And so unless there is a sufficient people to work in all the services and industries, then what's the economic future for this country? Is it going to be a declining population, more and more older people requiring more and more services and nobody to provide them? And so actually migration is essential all across Europe if it's going to maintain anything like the living standards that exist at the present time. It's probably a very uncomfortable truth for the right in British politics, but actually the whole economy relies on migration.
It was funny seeing Nigel Farage in the election campaign saying that he would get rid of the two-child benefit cap. And you think 20 years ago, he was exactly 10 years ago, 5 minutes ago, he was exactly the sort of person to say, we need to, penalise people for having kids so they can get benefits for them. And now he's, like you say, people like that are looking at the birth rate and thinking, Christ. And you do wonder, in 5 or 10 years, will he be saying, we need more migrants? That's the kind of shift you've seen around benefits.
The shift in inner city areas where there's a combination of falling birth rate, very high house prices, very high rents, insufficiency of council accommodation, unaffordable private sector, means people move out. And so in my own constituency, there's one school where the school roll has fallen from 300 or so 3 years ago to 150. It's not sustainable for a school. Other schools going in the same direction all across London, where there's only one borough in London which has an increasing population of children. No, it's Redbridge.
Wow, I would have had that as Tower Hamlets.
Tower Hamlets, I'm not sure. Tower Hamlets is probably a mixed picture. But what I'm saying, maybe I'm wrong on the totality of it, but the most London boroughs have declining child population, and therefore whole issues about school places and future of education. Now, some of me says, well, actually, that this means you can give a better quality of education to those children in those schools that now have a small school population, but you're going to have to increase the capitation rate and spend more on it. So we need a bit of imagination within the Department of Education. I'm not sure it's there.
But if I was Nigel Farage, and I was,
thank God you're not.
Yeah,
otherwise I wouldn't be here.
Well, this is I've always
I don't think you'd be here either. But there you go.
You get these like George Osborne, Ed Balls podcasts. They really disagree. They don't really. I've always thought if you really want to get two people that disagree on a podcast, Nigel Farage and Jeremy Corbyn would be fireworks. But
I used to do one with Theresa Gorman.
Yeah.
On LBC for a few months. We did it every Sunday morning, every other Sunday morning, me and Theresa Gorman. And the only thing I discovered about Theresa Gorman is that she likes to talk a lot and she really doesn't like the royal family. I was astonished because this was at the time of Diana's death. And so I said, okay, so what we're going to say? She said, let's talk about something else.
But you're a bit of a fan of the royals, aren't you? You get on with Harry and Meghan?
Yes, I do. Yes, I like Meghan. I like Meghan. I think she's great. She's got a sense of humour. She has a belief that she can make a contribution to the world and society, and I think she's good. I think she's nice. I like her.
Yeah, we spoke.
Is that wrong?
No, because when the last time I had you on, you were talking about Prince Philip and
Arsenal, yeah,
Elizabeth II. No, these were great stories, and I thought, I think people would be surprised at how You know, you looked at them as human beings, which is an argument against the monarchy, by the way. Anyway.
Well, I'm not in favour of rule by dissent, if you like, which is what the monarchy gives us. I want to live in a democratic society. Tony Benn always said, look, separate out the issue of the monarchy from the monarch. And somebody had a go at Tony at a meeting once about saying, why don't you condemn the Queen or something? He said, oh, please, please. She didn't ask for the job.
That's important.
Yeah. So separate out the individual from the institution.
Going back to 2017,
yep,
which is this anomaly that nobody in journalism or politics really wants to talk about right now.
Well, thank God I'm here today without Nigel Farage.
The vote share of the two major parties, I think, was about 83%. In this election, it's gone below 60%. Now, what I find really interesting is obviously the media pick a narrative and then they all say this thing. And the narrative about 2017 is that Theresa May was useless and Jeremy Corbyn was deeply unpopular. And yet, the Tory and Labour share of the vote, I don't think has been higher for decades. And then, of course, in this election, we're told that Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer, they're
grown-ups.
Effective grown-ups precisely. And the combined vote share of those two parties has gone below 60%. What changes between 2017 and 2024?
Good question. The 17 election, we started with 24% in the polls, roughly where the Tories started in this election. And I remember the utter consternation in my office when the election was announced. They all sort of stared like this. I said, what's the matter? They said, well, haven't you heard the news? I said, of course I've heard the news. I've just been watching it. And there's an election coming. I said, yeah, I know there is. What are we going to do? Oh, God, I said, listen, guys, you've had your shock moment. In the office, let's have a meeting now. Pull everybody together. Everybody made them all sit around a big table. All of them, everybody. I said, right, now quiet, everybody. Now all of you look out the window. So, has he lost it? And we're about to start. Has he completely lost it? So, so they all looked out the window. And I said, okay, what do you see? I said, well, people, cars, walking around, buses, river. I said, okay, we're going into this campaign. It's not about you. It's not about me. It's not about us. It's about everybody out there. And as of now, we're full on campaigning everywhere around the country. Don't be reading opinion polls. Go out there and mobilise and excite people. And I said, okay, right. And they said, what are you doing? I said, I'm going to Birmingham for the first meeting this afternoon. And I went and did it. And so we just went out there with utter determination that we would take the campaign to every spot in the country. And I did 100 events in that election campaign. And every one of them got bigger than the last one. Every single one did. And every time I got back to our esteemed party head office in the now demolished South Side, how sad, and there'd be analyses offered to me by some very smart people. Said, oh, Jeremy, it's terrible. You've got to have a defensive strategy. We're going to be thumped. We're going to lose. You're not going to get anywhere. I said, look, you're wrong. Come out on the road with me. He said, well, you're just seeing your friends. I said, well, maybe I am, but there's an awful lot of them. And so we built that buzz of the campaign and gave people that sense of hope. And that's what gave us the result. But it had every effect has an equal and opposite effect. And that had the effect of corralling the Tory vote back to the Tory party. Okay, the Tory proportion did go down, but the role of Farage and UKIP to basically support the Tories meant that you had this concentration of the vote almost of 1950s levels. 1951 general election, I think 90% of the population voted either Tory or Labour. It was the highest ever. Mm-hmm. We were almost back to those levels. And since then, obviously, there's been this diffusion of the vote of both parties, but the biggest diffusion has been for the Tories. Now, I think the interesting political study over the next few months and years is going to be the role of Farage and this now small far-right group in Parliament that does have a very large vote base. We've got to win that vote base back, and that's where the lessons of the French left, which in a term of a time of crisis, came back together. Because remember that the last presidential election was thrown by the left because of the refusal of the left parties and the Communist Party to get together on the first ballot. Had they got together on the first ballot, possibly, not sure, possibly Mélenchon would have got through to the last round. Whether he'd have won it or not, I don't know, but it would have been a choice between Macron and Mélenchon, not between Macron and the far right. Now, this time, the left were panicked and spooked by the first round, and so they did that sort of instant agreement, which took all of a day and a half to put together, and managed to become the largest party in the National Assembly, which is a huge step forward. But I'd just be cautious about what's happened in France. To quote Shakespeare, they've scotched the snake, they haven't killed it, of the far right. And so we've got to be aware that the rise of far-right politics in Britain, the intolerance, the nastiness, the racism of it is serious and on the rise. And if this government starts conceding ground to those kind of arguments, it will get worse and worse and worse. You cannot concede ground on racism.
Do you think Keir Starmer will?
Time will tell. Obviously, I hope not. Obviously, I hope that they will stand up for the rights of people to seek asylum, to seek a place of safety, and stop the grotesque levels of exaggeration and look at the boat people coming from Calais as human beings. They've stopped the Rwanda plan. Good. £250 million down the drain to Rwanda. I have no idea what Rwanda's going to do with that $250 million. If they're going to pay it back or not. I mean,
apparently not.
Apparently not. Well, it's probably spent it on something else already anyway. So that's gone. But that does mean you've got to look at it. I mean, I've been to Calais quite a few times. Indeed, I was so moved by it, I wrote a poem about it. These are human beings that have come from countries that we were at war with. Don't we have a responsibility? Didn't we bomb Afghanistan? Didn't we bomb Iraq? Didn't we support the bombing of Syria? You know, wars have consequences, and these are the consequences.
So if I was a reform voter saying, look, let's try and find a middle ground, Jeremy, we'll give asylum to Syrians, Iraqis, Afghans, but why should we give asylum to, I mean, I'm half Iranian. Why should, and I don't think this, just to be clear for the cameras, why should we give asylum to Iranians, Turkish Kurds, Pakistanis, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? What would you say to them?
Because we, as a nation, willingly and proudly signed up to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. We, as a nation, proudly signed up for the 1951 Geneva Convention on the Rights of Asylum, because we, as a nation, support the principle that every human being deserves a place of safety. And we would want it for ourselves. We would want it for apparently some others, but not all others. You have to look at it on the principles of human rights. And if a country, a wealthy country like this one, wants to buy its way out of its human rights obligations by outsourcing, in the case of the last government, to Rwanda, in the case of Australia, to Vanuatu and other places in the Pacific, then that is fundamentally wrong. And your family managed to get a place of safety from Iran. Surely our duty then is to do everything we can to support the improvement of human rights in Iran and other countries. And so you have to engage, you have to try and do your best to legally force things, but you have to be prepared to take it up and deal with it. You see, we as a country pride ourselves on saying we always gave a safe place for asylum seekers in this country. It's not actually true, but it's a good story. For example, large numbers of Russian Jews that came to Britain in the late 19th century, to begin with, came in, and there was very few restrictions. Then the Aliens Act came, I think 1905, which restricted them. Quite a large number of German Jewish refugees tried to come in the 1930s, more than the 20s, but some then. They weren't all welcome. They weren't all given ease of passage. Quite a lot managed to get here. Quite a lot didn't. Quite a lot weren't able to get out. And so you then look at the sort of bravery of individuals like Nick Winton and others that managed to arrange the passage for Jewish children out of Germany. a lot weren't allowed out, weren't allowed to get anywhere to a place of safety. And so we have this sort of narrative that somehow or other we've always helped real refugees, but not unreal refugees. Well, sorry, if you're facing political, social, or religious persecution, you have a right to seek asylum. That's what the Convention says. And so we've got to be prepared to stand up and say that. And also say the contribution that's been made, how our society's been enriched by all of this, enriched by all those Jewish people that came from Russia in the 19th century. Those that came from Germany made a massive contribution. Those that came from Vietnam, those like your family that have come from Iran, many others made a massive contribution to our society. Let's be intelligent about it and recognize these things and be a voice around the world, not for endless wars, but for looking at the causes of war and peace. I mean, okay, the wars at the moment reported are inevitably Ukraine and Gaza. Fine, understand that. They're huge, and I'll come on to Gaza in a moment. But hardly any reporting of the ghastly conflict that's going on in the Congo, in the DRC. Thousands of people are being killed. Why? Because Congo has a large amount of minerals, cobalt, coltan, many, many others, being usually mined by militia groups controlling the population. In the case of coltan, a lot of child labour. That material is then taken by road into Rwanda, bought by the big mining companies or by Chinese mining companies, and then appears in our mobile phones. Where's the reporting on Congo? Where's the discussion about Congo? None, because it's inconvenient. We've got to look at it. It's the greed of Western companies and countries that actually fuels that particular conflict.
I'm doing another straw man again. Because
who's a straw man? You or me?
I'm going to do the straw man thing again.
What's a straw man?
Well, like I'm going to create an abstract persona, which I think is a ridiculous persona, with making a ridiculous argument. Because you just mentioned Congo. This abstract persona, let's say it's a journalist that writes in The Spectator, would say, Jeremy Corbyn only cares about Gaza. Won't he talk about other conflicts? He doesn't
just talked about other conflicts.
Quite. And this is the funniest thing. On every demonstration about any persecuted minority or any conflict anywhere on earth, you're pretty damn sure Jeremy Corbyn's going to be there. Is that kind of claim made by those people because they're ignorant of your record, or what? Because it seems a really stupid thing to say. You've always been there with regards to Russia against Putin in the 90s. 92, I was there. Yeah, it's kind of annoying. But, I'm used to being annoyed. It's a good thing I don't take all this stuff personally, really, isn't it? Otherwise, I wouldn't be sleeping too well. Listen, at the last and all the Gaza demonstrations, I always conclude my speech by talking about wider conflicts around the world. Say to people, thank you for being here for the Palestinian people. Thank you for your solidarity with them. But we need to also have solidarity with all other victims of war around the world. And we've just produced a book, which I hope you'll manage to have a discussion program about at some point on Novara, called The Monstrous Anger of Guns. And this is about the power of the arms trade globally. And it's written by Andrew Feinstein, Paul Rogers, and a number of others, with a section from me in it. And there we're talking about the influence into conflict of the arms industry. And so I think we need to have a more serious approach to conflicts around the world, because we're now heading to a situation in Britain where there is no increase in public spending planned in any department at all except defence, where expenditure will go up to 2.5% of GDP, probably by 2030, if not sooner. So that's only 6 years' time. And you disagree with that?
Yeah, because I think we should be looking at how we can promote peace in the world. Look at it as global history at the moment. We've got more inequality, more poverty, more environmental dangers than we've ever had before in recorded history. We have more people who are displaced persons than ever before in human history. So what are we doing? Everybody around the world is spending more and more on arms and defense for wars that can only, the likelihood of which can only be increased by increased arms expenditure. So we need to have a more sensible, more intelligent approach to this.
But John Healey would say
John
to
Healey,
you,
yes,
this is my fourth straw. John Healey
How many more straws have you got?
Well, I have to say this because I don't agree with any of these points of view. That's the thing.
It's all right.
John Healey would say...
I understand your role.
John Healey would say... By the way, the 2.5 thing is really convenient because, 0.5 doesn't sound like much. It's about £10 billion. John Healey would say, well, because of Russia and Ukraine, the whole of Europe, the whole of NATO is having to amp up its defence budgets. And in our case, go from 2% to 2.5%. What would you say to that?
What I would say is that Russia is also increasing its defence budget, as is India, as is China, as is every European country, to differing degrees. And the NATO summit is just finishing now, has been almost forcing countries to spend more and more on it. I think Putin is completely wrong to invade Ukraine. I think the war is disgusting and disgraceful and ought to stop. There ought to be a ceasefire. There has to be a process to bring that about. Where has the UN been on this? Where has the European governments been on this, on trying to build up some kind of negotiated way out of it? Otherwise, what are we going to do? Have a permanent sort of mid-level war between Ukraine and Russia, in which NATO pours in weapons and has a debate about how far they're allowed to bomb into Russia or not. Russia pours in more and more weapons to its border region and decides how far it's going to bomb. Is there going to be a sort of negotiation about the level of this eternal conflict? Or is there going to be an end to this conflict? Or the worst scenario is it going to pile in more and more weapons and they're actually then going to start trying to invade Russia and then Russia's going to kick back? I mean, you could be looking at something really, really dangerous here. And don't forget, there's a lot of nuclear weapons around. So surely to goodness, we need a voice of peace. And I admire the latter attempts of Antonio Guterres to try and bring about a negotiating ceasefire. I admire the efforts of the Pope and, of course, of the African Union. Interesting is the African Union and the president of Brazil and other countries that tried to bring about negotiations to get a ceasefire, not Western Europe or the United States. But there has to be some move on it. Otherwise, where does all this go?
We had Starmer saying that we'll give $3 billion a year to Ukraine for as, quote, long as it takes. And it's interesting to me that this is a man who says, I want to measure the outcome on absolutely everything. But on this particular thing, we're going to maybe throw money away. Now, that's not to say you shouldn't give money to Ukraine. You should or you shouldn't. But just saying we'll give $3 billion a year into eternity just doesn't strike me as very serious. But anyway.
But then there's the other conflict in Palestine going on at the present time. I don't know what the government's latest position is, but there has to be a ceasefire and there has to be an end to the supply of arms to Israel and the use of the RAF base in Cyprus, or bases in Cyprus, which are part of that conduit.
On Gaza, this has been a sticky issue for Joe Biden. We've just had this pier, which was announced in the State of Union address. It's cost more than $300 million. I don't think it even lasted a month, as a point which aid could be dispersed into the Gaza Strip. Do you think Joe Biden should be the US president after November? Do you think he's equipped to be the president after November?
Well, it's not up to me to decide, but he doesn't seem to me to be kind of coping terribly well with the job he's got at the present time. And obviously there's going to be, I guess, a lot of pressure on him from the Democrat establishment and so on to stand aside and somebody else take over. But it's not a great scenario when you've got a choice between Biden and Trump at the present time, or Trump and another, both of which are pursuing fairly aggressive global policies. On the issue you just mentioned of the pier that's been set up, I always thought it was a really weird thing to do. The way to get aid into Gaza is by truck from Egypt, pretty obviously, and by truck from Israel. But the trouble was the aid was being bombed as it came in. And who was bombing it but Israel? And where were the bombs coming from that bombed the aid that came in other than the USA? So the US has built this quite expensive, unnecessary landing point, which has lasted hardly any length of time at all. And in the meantime, 40,000 Gazans, Palestinian Gazans, have already died. Many more bodies are being found under the rubble. And many children particularly are dying from malnutrition, dehydration, diarrhea, all totally preventable conditions. Operations taking place with no anaesthetic by very brave and wonderful doctors. And I've been many times in Gaza. Only a few kilometres away was any amount of water, there's any amount of medicine, there's any amount of food. We're watching the deliberate starvation of the entire population on live television. And we're supplying arms to the people that are deliberately starving that population. What's going on? Where's our humanity? What's happened to us?
Where's our humanity is an important point, because there are obviously many people who defend what Israel is doing. And today I saw another picture of this. I don't like to bring it up, but I saw a picture of a child without a head. And I've repeatedly seen images of decapitated children, Palestinian children. And I think to myself, even if you were pro-Israel, etc., as a parent, how can you see that and not have sympathy for the plight of these people? And yet somehow some people don't.
People in Israel that would agree with what you just said. Quite a lot of them, actually. I speak to my friend Ofer Kassim, who is a member of the Knesset, and he is threatened with removal from Knesset because he refuses to endorse the war in Gaza, because he is a minority voice in the Knesset. There are people in Israel who very bravely gone out on demonstrations to stop the war and support Palestinians and Palestinian life. And so this is about humanity. This is about what we do. Are we more interested in selling arms to Israel, providing that conduit of the continuous supply of weaponry, or are we serious about bringing an end to the conflict in order to save life? 40,000 have died. I want the hostages released. Of course I do. You do. Everybody does. There is a way forward on this, but it does revolve around a ceasefire. Netanyahu has no interest in a ceasefire because he knows as soon as a ceasefire comes, he's out of office. So we're actually pursuing a war for the benefit of the ego of Netanyahu.
John Ashworth. Prior to the 2019... How is he? Well, that's a good point. He's got a new job, hasn't he? That was awfully quick.
Very quick, the new job, I thought.
Really. I don't think it was an open tendering process. So he was slagging you off in the days before the 2019 general election. He was slagging off his own party, actually, and he got caught, which would show he's not a particularly intelligent man. And anyway, he lost his seat in Leicester in the last election, subsequent to some of the remarks you've already talked about. How did you feel when news came through that John Ashworth had lost his seat?
I was appalled at the statement he made about people from Bangladesh, which was even worse than the statement made by Keir Starmer. And I wasn't surprised. And quite honestly, if a Labour politician dumps on a minority community, well, a very substantial minority community in Leicester, what's the outcome going to be other than anger and revulsion in that community? There's this sort of arrogant assumption that parties make that somehow or other there's nowhere else to go. The working class poor will always vote Labour because there's no alternative. The Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Indian minorities will always vote Labour because there's nowhere else to go. Well, in Leicester, they're actually a majority, and that was the result. And so I have had a very nice discussion with the new MP for Leicester South. Good discussion, good chat with him, and we're working out what we can do on Gaza, what we can do on lots of other things. And so John Ashworth has had his comeuppance on this time.
Well, John Ashworth was on Sky on Thursday, slagging the new MP off, saying that Sky News had more chance of talking to Shergar than talking to the new MP for the constituency. And it spoke.
Does he know where Shergar is or something?
Oh, it's just there you go. I mean, it speaks to me of an entitlement with the political class, much of the political class. They just, people like, and in this life, you know, you're told it by your parents growing up. Nobody owes you anything.
Yeah.
But it does feel to me that people like John Ashworth feel that they're owed something by the electorate. And if the electorate deviates, then they're evil, immoral, stupid.
This is the sort of Peter Mandelson analysis of voting intentions, that there's nowhere else to go but voting Labour. So you don't really need to bother about what the working class communities think. Well, he seems to forget they've all got votes and they don't have to cast them. So they don't necessarily vote for anybody else, they just don't vote. And that's where you get the figures we were talking about of this very low turnout. I have to say in my own constituency, the turnout was very high.
Well, your majority, I think I'm correct in saying your majority, is it bigger than Starmer's, or is it about the same, isn't it?
The vote I got was much bigger than
the
Starmer.
vote, but even the majority.
The majority is bigger as well, yeah.
Because I think Feinstein did terrifically well.
He got about 20% of the vote, I think, didn't he?
Yeah. What I would say is that that's absolutely true. Many of them don't vote, but increasingly, as they did in Leicester, they can vote for alternatives, whether that's the Green Party or independents. And of course, we had this record number of independents being elected, including yourself. The other 5 are principally on the issue of Gaza. Leanne Mohammed in Ilford came very close. Jess Phillips almost lost her seat. So there's clearly something shifting with regards to, actually, if you're very well organised and you're a good candidate and the community knows you and people are upset with the ruling party, whether that's the Tories or Labour, you've got a decent shot.
I think if the election had been 6 months on, in October, November time rather than July, that would have given Leanne and Andrew much more time to campaign. Who knows what the results might have been.
Do you think, so Leanne Mohammed would have
I think she could well have done, because she was only 500 off there. And she was completely underestimated by the Labour machine. Young Palestinian woman, very articulate, very intelligent, very able. I'm looking forward to a great future for Leanne Mohammed. And in my own constituency, we're starting work now on what we do for the future, because obviously there's no longer a Labour Party for me to report to, because they have expelled me from the Labour Party. We're setting up community assemblies that will meet regularly every month. It'll be partly about me reporting, but it'll be much more about campaigning and demands that are made by people. This is grassroots politics rising, not just in my constituency, but all over the country. It's not about party labels, it's about community voices. And I think a lot is going to develop from that. So I'm working with the other 4 MPs who were elected as independents, but also the Green group of MPs, newly elected. We're going to be sharing views, I'm sure, on Gaza, on 2-child benefit cap, and a whole lot of other things, and I'm looking forward to working with them. Also, I'm sure the SNP and Plaid, SNP much diminished, and Plaid are nevertheless going to be sharing our views on quite a lot of things, and also the constitutional electoral system issues for the future are actually very important as well, and they're going to come up for a lot more debate.
Thank you for correcting me on the number of independents. I said 6, it's 5.
Yeah, well, there is a 6th in Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
But I think his version of, he won't mind me saying, his version of independence isn't quite the same as mine.
Yeah. In terms of that block of people around Gaza, yes. So tell me more about these community assemblies, because you've written this piece in The Guardian, and reading it, I thought this is Jeremy Corbyn. It sounds to me like you're trying to create a prototype for local activists, local campaigners to win and defy the big party machines.
I wouldn't be so arrogant to say I'm putting forward a prototype. I'm putting forward...
Aren't you?
I'm putting forward an idea. Now, others may have similar or more specific ideas about it, but I'm putting it there of what I am doing and what I want to see in my community. Look, they've given me the enormous honour of electing me again. 11th time I've been elected for the same constituency. And what I pick up all the time is the frustration of voices not heard, the frustration of that group of older women who were denied pensions because of the change in the pension age, WASPy women, frustration of young black kids who can't get the jobs and careers they want, frustration of Muslim women who put up with Islamophobia all the time, frustration of young people, graduated, can't afford to get anywhere to live, get low pay, end up with a student debt and massive housing costs, can't save any money, frustrations of life. And also the need for expenditure on youth facilities, expenditure on artistic endeavours and so on in our community. And so to me, I will articulate those voices best I can, but I'm not in any one of those categories. I'm in a very privileged position. I've been elected to Parliament again. So it's my job to facilitate those voices. And that's what our forums are going to do. And do you know what? It's fun and it's exciting. and it's going to be a very important movement for the future.
Well, it's much more.
And it's not going to go away either, this demand.
It's much more you than the Labour Party, which is quite funny.
Well, it's what I tried to make the Labour Party into, because my biggest struggle with the Labour Party was even uttering the words community organisers. My God. It was like, as soon as you say to the leading Labour bureaucracy in the country, what I want is more community organised, they said, why? I said, well, because we need to be organised in community. Why? Because we need to be a voice for those people and we need to empower those voices. What frightened them was the idea of community organisers organising in the community being an eternal and permanent pressure on the local Labour Party. Surely you need to create the pressure on yourself. MPs are in a privileged position. They need pressure on them. I know that. I am an MP and I deserve to have that pressure on me, just like any other member of Parliament. And community organising isn't just about parliamentary politics. It's about doing things yourself. I'll finish on this. Look, Whitton Hospital, 2009, the government proposed to close the A&E department. And we found out about it, mainly because they rather stupidly sent me an email they should have sent to somebody else. But that's their problem. It was fun. And we set up a massive campaign. I just called a public meeting and said, I'm the MP, call a public meeting. We've got this problem. What we can do about it? 300 people came to the public meeting. And we discussed at some length, actually, what we're going to do about it. We set up a campaign, we set up meetings, we set up marches, petitions. I raised it in Parliament, etc., etc., etc. We got all the media going on it as best we could. We got thousands of people involved. We got a big march down the street. We won. In winning that, it empowered people so much. So when 2 years later they came along trying to sell off a whole lot of property, hospital property, we were ready for them. Defeated that too. So that becomes our hospital, not their hospital. And people feel good about that.
Jeremy, we'll leave it there. It's been great talking to you.
Thank you so much. And can I come again?
Well, you know what? We'd love you back. And
Are you sure?
Yes.
Don't you have to go to some collective to agree whether I can come or not?
Not with you. Sometimes with other people, not with you. And it's great to see you on top form, full of energy. You haven't looked better, I think, in a long time. So obviously winning suits you as an independent.
Cocoa butter.